My name's Emily, I'm 35, and everything in my world shifted at my dad's retirement party last fall. The elegant venue sparkled with triumph as my father, James, lifted his sparkling goblet. He beamed, declaring to cheers that his true pride lay in the kids who'd made him look good. His icy stare locked onto me from across the crowded room. "You're free to go," he said, his voice cutting through the noise so everyone could hear. Shame surged through me, and I rose on unsteady legs, my face burning. But then my husband, Mark, got to his feet beside me. What unfolded next reshaped my entire understanding of family. "Hang on, I'll get to that in a sec. Drop a comment to let me know where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to hit that like button." That moment when Mark stood up flipped my life upside down, and trust me, you'll want to stick around for the ending. I was raised in Westport, a ritzy suburb outside Seattle, where excellence wasn't just praised, it was demanded. Our sprawling craftsman-style house with its pristine garden looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. But behind closed doors, things weren't so rosy. My dad, James Thornton, wasn't just a high-powered bank executive. He was a guy who weighed affection in trophies and failures. My mom, Clara, was stunning, soft-spoken, and completely overshadowed by my dad's commanding presence. She'd sometimes murmur words of comfort after his rants, but she never stood up to him. I was 22 when ovarian cancer took her, and with her went the only shield between me and Dad's relentless standards. My siblings were the opposite of me. Ethan, 5 years older, trailed Dad into the finance world, earning an MBA from Stanford and soaring at a top-tier hedge fund. Sophia, 3 years my senior, became a neurosurgeon, racking up awards like they were souvenirs. They were the shining stars, the ones who gave our family name weight, as Dad loved to remind me. And then there was me. As a kid, I dove into novels and sketching, finding solace in imaginary worlds when reality got too heavy. I'll never forget my 13th birthday piano recital, perched at our sleek mahogany grand in the living room packed with family friends. I was playing Chopin's Nocturne, my hands shaking, and midway through, I struck a single wrong key. Just one. Dad shot up, smoothed his jacket, and strode out. The room went quiet except for the click of the front door. I pushed through the piece, my eyes stinging with tears, but I finished it. That day cemented how he saw me. One slip-up, and I was worthless in his eyes. College gave me a taste of freedom. I majored in English at Vassar, ignoring Dad's demands to pursue economics. "You're wasting your future on daydreams," he snapped when I waved my acceptance letter in front of him. I went anyway, piecing together scholarships and waitressing gigs since he wouldn't fund a pointless degree. Those years built my resilience, but my battles with self-doubt and panic attacks grew worse. I'd achieve something that thrilled me, only to hear Dad's voice in my head asking why it wasn't bigger. I dated here and there, but nothing stuck. I'd either gravitate toward guys who echoed Dad's disapproval or sabotage things with the decent ones before they could see my flaws. All that changed 4 years ago at a cozy bookshop in Portland. I was scanning the vintage fiction aisle when I grabbed for the last copy of Wuthering Heights at the same moment as someone else. I looked up to see Mark Evans, with gentle eyes and a grin that instantly put me at ease. "Take it," he said warmly. "Anyone chasing Brontes got better claim than I do." We ended up chatting for hours at the cafe across the street. Mark was a web developer who adored books almost as much as I did. He really heard me when I talked, not just nodding while planning his next point, but truly listening. When I shared my vision of launching a tiny press for undiscovered writers, he didn't scoff or call it a pipe dream. He leaned in, asking smart questions about my strategy. 8 months later, with Mark's support and his knack for crunching numbers, I started Beacon Books. We focused on bold fiction from underrepresented authors, kicking off with 3 titles in our first year. By year 3, one of our novels snagged a National Indie Award, and we'd grown to 8 titles a year. It wasn't a gold mine, but it filled me with pride. Mark and I tied the knot in a quiet ceremony at the Seattle Central Library. Dad didn't show, citing a critical meeting in Denver. Ethan mailed a pricey but generic gift. Sophia was the only one from my family there, ducking out right after the vows for a medical symposium. "They don't get you," Mark murmured as we swayed at our reception, surrounded by his tight-knit family and our friends instead of mine. I'd barely exchanged words with Dad in over a year when his retirement invite landed. After 35 years at Pacific Trust Bank, James Thornton was stepping down as senior VP, and they were throwing a lavish bash at the Willow, Seattle's swankiest spot. "We can skip it," Mark said, eyeing my shaky hands as I held the embossed invitation. "Maybe he's trying to mend things now that he's slowing down," I said, though I wasn't convinced. Maybe retirement would soften him. On the night of the party, I stood in front of our bedroom mirror in a deep green dress that cost more than I'd ever spent on a single piece. My hair was swept into a sleek updo, my makeup meticulously done to mask the dark circles from a week of sleepless nights. "You're stunning," Mark said, straightening his tie next to me. "I feel like I'm gonna lose my dinner," I confessed. A panic attack slammed into me just as we were about to head out. Mark sat beside me on our bed, guiding me through the breathing techniques I'd learned in therapy. His hand traced gentle arcs across my back as my breath steadied. "We can still bail," he said softly. "No," I replied, dabbing on fresh lipstick with trembling fingers. "I have to do this. I need to give it one last shot." As we cruised toward the city center, Mark slid his hand over mine, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "No matter what goes down tonight, you've got people who adore you for being you," he said. I gave a small nod, wanting to trust his words, but years of love tied to conditions had me doubting deep inside. At my core, I still believed I had to prove I was worthy of affection, and this evening felt like my last shot to finally win my dad's approval. The Willow glowed like a jewel against Seattle's twinkling skyline, its classic brick exterior lit up in the cool autumn dusk. Mark handed our keys to a valet, a young guy in a sharp navy jacket who swung my door open with polished ease. My heels tapped the stone pathway like a ticking clock as we neared the entrance. "Just keep breathing," Mark murmured, his hand a steady anchor at my lower back. The host guided us to a private dining hall where my dad's retirement bash was already in full swing. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, bathing the crowd of about 80 in a warm golden light, most of them dressed to the nines, sipping from delicate flutes of champagne. A small string ensemble played gently in the corner, their music nearly lost under the hum of refined chatter from Seattle's financial bigwigs. I caught sight of Ethan right away, commanding attention near the open bar. At 39, my brother was a mirror image of Dad, his bespoke suit and confident posture turning heads. His silver cufflinks flashed as he waved his hands, spinning a tale that had his colleagues chuckling with delight. "Emily," he called when he spotted us, his grin tight and not quite warm. "Didn't expect you to show," he said, offering Mark a quick handshake before turning back to his group. "This is my younger sister and her husband. Emily's into something with literature, right?" He didn't wait for my reply. "Mark, meet some folks from Pinnacle Capital. We just sealed the Carter deal last month." The talk snapped back to investments, leaving us out like we didn't exist. Mark gave my hand a soft squeeze as we slipped away. Over by the appetizer spread, Sophia stood radiant in a sapphire gown that probably cost more than my car payment. She was flashing a massive emerald engagement ring to a couple of women I didn't know. "Summer wedding at the Arboretum," she was saying. "David pushed for Napa, but I said the heat would ruin the vibe." She glanced my way, pausing for a split second. "Emily, you made it," she said, her eyes skimming my outfit with a subtle once-over. "Green's always a safe choice." She introduced us to her fiancé, David, a cardiac surgeon with a dazzling smile and a Yale drawl. Their chat swirled around their upcoming nuptials and a recent medical summit in Vienna before Sophia drifted off to mingle with bigger names. "Your siblings live up to the hype," Mark whispered as we stepped away. I was reaching for a glass of sparkling wine from a waiter's tray when a thin hand gripped my arm. Aunt Margaret, Dad's older sister, pulled me into a rigid embrace that reeked of high-end perfume and silent critique. "Emily, dear," she said, brushing an air kiss near my cheek. "You're looking well." The faint hesitation in her voice spoke volumes. Aunt Margaret always backed Dad, framing his impossible standards as fair instead of crushing. She leaned in, her tone hushed. "Make an effort to impress him tonight. It means a lot to him, especially with all his peers here." Before I could say a word, she was already fawning over Sophia's ring. The dining hall screamed money and influence. Tables were adorned with vases of lilies and orchids, their petals glowing under the soft light. The bar boasted premium spirits and rare vintages. Servers glided through with trays of gourmet bites, smoked salmon on crostini, grilled prawns, miniature tarts. All around, talk buzzed about stock markets, beachfront properties, and elite academies. I finally spotted Dad across the room, holding court among a group of distinguished men. At 68, James Thornton still cut an imposing figure, his gray hair and sharp features signaling a man used to commanding respect. He laughed at a comment, and for a fleeting moment, I glimpsed a warmth I rarely got to feel. Mark caught my pause. "Want me to tag along to say hi?" I shook my head. "I need to face this on my own." Taking a steadying breath, I walked toward Dad. He saw me coming but kept talking until I stood awkwardly at the group's edge. At last, in a brief lull, he turned to me. "Emily, you showed up," he said, his voice carrying more surprise than joy. "Congrats on retiring," I said, holding out a gift bag with a sleek silver pen Mark had helped me pick out. "Thanks," he said, taking it without a glance inside. "Gentlemen, this is my youngest, Emily. She runs a little book outfit." "I own a small press, actually," I added. "One of our authors just made the shortlist for the Washington Literary Prize." His face didn't shift. "Emily's always been lost in her stories, while her siblings built real careers," he said. The men gave polite laughs. "Speaking of, Ethan just landed a $50 million contract, and Sophia's engaged to Dr. David Langston, head of cardiology at Seattle General." The message was clear, their wins mattered. Mine didn't. "Great to see you," I mumbled, stepping back before my welling tears could spill. Mark was waiting with a fresh glass of wine which I took with a shaky hand. That rough. Same as always, I said, taking a long sip. The cocktail hour swirled around us. I watched Dad glide through the crowd like royalty, soaking up praise and swapping stories about his storied career. Each warm greeting he gave made his frostiness toward me sting even more. When it was time to sit for dinner, I found we'd been stuck at a table far from the head one where Dad, Ethan, Sophia, and the big shots were seated. Our table included distant cousins and junior staff who looked as thrilled as I felt about the arrangement. "I'm Mark Evans, Emily's husband," Mark said brightly, unfazed by the table politics. "You're James's daughter?" asked an older woman across from us. "The one who doesn't do medicine or finance," I nodded, forcing a smile. "I run a publishing house." "How sweet," she said, her tone like she was praising a kid's finger painting. "A little side project." "Of this would have happened," Dad went on, his voice softening a touch, "without my late wife Clara by my side." My breath hitched. He almost never brought up Mom since she passed. "Clara knew what it took to chase success," he said, a faint tremor in his words. "She was my rock through those tough early years, and I only wish she could be here to see the empire her strength helped create." Tears welled in my eyes. This was the most feeling I'd seen from Dad in ages. Maybe stepping back from work had cracked open something he'd kept locked away. Around me, folks dabbed their eyes with napkins. Mark's hand slipped into mine under the table, warm and grounding. Dad cleared his throat, his poise snapping back. "But a man's real mark isn't in profits or contracts. It's in what he passes down, in who carries his principles forward." My heart fluttered. Could this be it? Would he finally recognize my path, different but just as worthy? "I've been lucky there," he said, nodding toward the head table. "Ethan's gone beyond every goal, not just a financier but a trailblazer in the industry. The Carter deal alone would cap most careers, but for him, it's just another win in a string of triumphs." Ethan dipped his head, soaking up the praise like it was his birthright. "And Sophia," Dad's voice brimmed with pride, "saving lives every day as one of Seattle's top surgeons. Just last week, she led a cutting-edge procedure that's making waves in medical circles. Sharp, driven, flawless. Everything I worked to instill." Sophia gave a modest smile, her emerald ring glinting as she brushed a strand of her flawless hair. Dad lifted his goblet higher. "So tonight, as I turn the page on this chapter, I look at what truly counts. My real children are the ones who have made me proud." The room erupted in cheers. Guests turned to beam at Ethan and Sophia, who basked in the spotlight with effortless poise. I sat glued to my chair, the words slamming into me like a fist. My real children. As if I wasn't his daughter, as if I didn't belong or even exist, but the worst was still coming. As the clapping faded, Dad's eyes roamed the room and locked onto mine. The air grew heavy as our gazes met across the hall. "You can go," he said, his voice slicing through the sudden hush. At first, some guests looked puzzled, unsure who he meant. Then heads swiveled toward me. Whispers spread like wildfire as the truth sank in. Dad had just cut me off in front of everyone. My chest tightened, a sharp ache spreading. The grand room started to blur at the edges. My vision narrowed, my pulse pounding in my ears, drowning out everything but Dad's cold stare and those three crushing words. Across the way, Aunt Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Even she hadn't seen this level of harshness coming. Sophia kept her gaze on her perfectly polished nails, avoiding me. Ethan's lips curled into a faint smirk, like Dad had landed a sly jab. The silence dragged on, suffocating. Eyes drilled into me, every guest a witness to my shame. My legs felt like concrete as I slowly pushed my chair back and stood, my knees wobbling. The chair's scrape echoed in the quiet hall, unnaturally loud. Humiliation burned through me, raw and searing. This wasn't just another quiet letdown. This was a public dismissal, a loud declaration that I didn't measure up enough to even be there. My whole life, I'd chased Dad's approval, and in one moment he'd made it clear I'd never get it. I clutched the table's edge, steadying myself, fighting the urge to sprint out or sob. I refused to let him see me crumble. If I had to walk out, I'd do it with whatever pride I could scrape together. Then came a sound that shifted everything, the scrape of another chair beside me. Mark rose, his movements slow and intentional. When I glanced at him through my fog of shame, his face wasn't flushed with embarrassment but tight with controlled anger. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Dad's expression hardened, his jaw clenching at this unexpected defiance. He hadn't counted on pushback, especially not from my husband, who he'd always dismissed as a minor footnote in my already disappointing story. "Sit down," Dad ordered, speaking to Mark directly for maybe the first time that night. "This isn't your business." But Mark stayed standing, drawing himself up taller, his shoulders square, his eyes fixed on Dad's across the room. The air crackled with tension. Nobody stirred, nobody spoke. Then Mark did something that split my life into before and after. With calm precision, he picked up his water glass and spoon, the gentle ting of metal on crystal slicing through the heavy quiet, pulling every gaze in the room, a classic call for a toast. Dad's face darkened with fury at this break in his script. This was his night, his stage, his carefully crafted show of dominance. Mark had just challenged it in the most polite yet undeniable way. "What are you doing?" Dad snapped, his voice losing some of its edge. Mark ignored him, pausing until the room was pin-drop silent, every guest poised for what came next. His hand was steady as he set the spoon down, his face calm but resolute. I'd never seen this fierce, unshakable side of him. "I'd like to raise a toast," Mark said, his voice steady and resonant, "to the woman James Thornton couldn't see." Gasps echoed through the hall. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Next to me, an older woman muttered, "Good heavens," to her friend. For those who don't know, I'm Mark Evans, Emily's husband. And since James shared his side tonight, I want to tell you the truth about the daughter he just told to leave. Dad took a step forward. "That's enough. Security can show you out." "Go ahead," Mark said coolly. But I wonder how the Seattle Times would spin James Thornton having his daughter and son-in-law dragged out of his retirement gala. "I bet your finance buddies would eat that up." Dad froze, his eyes flicking to his colleagues around the room. His image was everything. Mark had hit his weak spot. 4 years ago, Mark went on, Emily started Beacon Books with her own savings and a small loan she earned without any family pull. Last month, they published Tide and Ember, which not only made the Washington Literary Prize shortlist but just got picked up for a TV series. Murmurs of surprise buzzed through the crowd. This was news to me too. Mark must have gotten the call today and saved it to cheer me up later. What James left out is that Emily's press has lifted up voices big publishers ignored. Veterans, refugees, and folks who grew up in homes where love came with strings. Their reading program has put books in the hands of over 4,000 kids in Seattle's roughest neighborhoods. I felt like I was watching a dream unfold, not my own life. Mark was standing up for me, listing accomplishments Dad had scoffed at or never cared to know. While Ethan was killing it in boardrooms and Sophia was climbing the medical ladder, it was Emily who took a semester off college to care for her mom during her cancer fight. Emily who sat by Clara's bedside, reading her favorite novels when she was too frail to turn the pages herself. Throat closed up as those memories flooded back. Those quiet moments by Mom's bedside had been tender, heartbreaking, and irreplaceable. What James doesn't know, Mark went on, his tone sharpening, is that the deposit for Ethan's first San Francisco condo came from Emily's college savings. She handed it over when his credit tanked after that betting mess he kept buried from Dad. Ethan's face went pale. That was our private pact, a rare flicker of trust between us when he'd shown up at my door, broken and begging. I'd helped because, despite it all, he was my brother. I never asked for repayment, let alone for him to stand up for me against Dad. For 35 years, James, you've told Emily she falls short. Too emotional, too creative, too far from the road you mapped out. Mark swept his gaze across the room, speaking to the guests now. But here's the truth about family. Real family doesn't hand out scorecards. Real family doesn't tie love to trophies. Real family sees you, lifts you up, and stands by you when it's tough, especially when it's tough. Dad found his voice again. You've got no place talking like this in front of my peers and friends. You don't know our family. I know plenty, Mark shot back. I know a man who publicly casts out his daughter at his retirement gala isn't showcasing a legacy. He's exposing its emptiness. The room was so still, I could hear the faint clink of ice settling in glasses. Nobody stirred. Nobody seemed to exhale. Mark turned to me then, his gaze softening like a warm embrace. Emily is the toughest person I know, not because she met her father's unreachable bar, but because she endured it and carved out her own identity anyway. He lifted his water glass one last time, facing Dad again. So here's to you, James Thornton, for showing us the kind of parent we'll never become. With that, Mark set down his glass and gently clasped my hand. His warm fingers steadied me as the room buzzed with shock, humiliation, and a strange new feeling I couldn't yet pin down. We walked toward the exit, our steps ringing on the polished stone floor. No one moved to block us. No one said a word. The stunned silence of 80 guests felt heavy, like it pressed against my skin. As we neared the doors, Dad's voice boomed again. "If you leave now, don't ever come back," he yelled, a hint of panic lacing his rage. "You're done, both of you got it." We didn't pause, didn't look back. Mark's hand stayed firm in mine. As we passed the final table, an older man I knew as one of Dad's oldest colleagues met my eyes. He gave a subtle nod, a quiet sign of respect or maybe support. It was the first time anyone from Dad's circle had seen me as more than a letdown. The doors shut behind us, dulling the burst of chatter that erupted in our wake. The valet, catching the tail end of the drama, kept his eyes down as he rushed to fetch our car. The crisp night air washed over my hot cheeks like a balm, fresh and freeing after the stifling pressure of the dining hall. Mark opened my car door, then slid into the driver's seat. We didn't speak until the Willow's glowing facade faded in the rearview, like waking from a vivid bad dream. "You okay?" Mark asked softly, his voice cutting through the car's quiet darkness. I was I was broken, mortified, and oddly, deeply unburdened. Something knotted tight inside me for years had finally unraveled, leaving me raw but somehow less heavy. I'm not sure, I said truthfully, but I think I could be someday. Mark took my hand again, and we drove home in silence, leaving behind a pile of shattered expectations, heading toward something unknown but fiercely worth finding. The floodgates burst the second we stepped into our apartment. I sank onto the sofa, sobs ripping through me as decades of bottled-up hurt poured out. Mark held me wordlessly, his shirt soaking up my tears, his arms solid around my trembling frame. "I'm sorry," I choked out between cries. "I'm so sorry you had to do that." "I'm not," Mark said firmly. "I've been itching to tell your dad off for 4 years. He'll never let this go." Fresh tears spilled at the thought. Deep down, some naive part of me still clung to the dream of a father who'd love me as I was, not the one I got. "That's his failure," Mark said. "And honestly, Emily, his approval isn't worth chasing." We talked until 2 a.m., sorting through the night's chaos. The initial shock melted into a tangle of feelings: sorrow for the bond I'd never have with Dad, fury at his harshness, worry about family fallout, and beneath it all, a fragile sense of freedom. "Did I go too far?" Mark asked as we finally got ready for bed, a trace of doubt in his voice for the first time. "You stood up for me when no one else ever did, not even me," I said. Sleep came in restless snatches, broken by my phone's buzz. Dad called 9 times between midnight and sunrise, leaving voicemails that grew angrier, demanding apologies and threatening repercussions. I let each one roll to voicemail, the screen's glow flashing in our dark bedroom like far-off thunder. Morning brought a text from Sophia. "You always have to steal the show. Dad's retirement was his moment. You and Mark wrecked it like always." I stared at her words, stunned by how we saw the same night so differently. In her world, I was the troublemaker who hogged Dad's spotlight, not the one he'd publicly thrown out. The surprise came at 10:23 a.m. when Ethan called. I nearly ignored it, bracing for more blame, but something nudged me to answer. "That was some scene last night," he said, his voice hard to read. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said tightly. A pause hung between us. I know, a heavy silence hung between us. "Is it true what Mark said about the condo money?" "Yeah," I answered. "Why didn't you ever rub that in my face, all these years, even when I wasn't exactly your biggest fan?" "Because that's not why I bilayed you out," I said plainly. The quiet stretched again. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice softer, almost fragile. "I never really thanked you for that, I should've." "It's in the past," I said. "Maybe it's not," he replied, clearing his throat. "Look, what Dad did at the party was okay. I've never seen him go that far." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest Ethan had ever come to taking my side. After we hung up, I stared at my phone, grappling with this unexpected shift in our dynamic. At the office that Monday, my boss, Sarah, took one look at my weary face and pulled me into her office. "You look like you've been through hell," she said, handing me a mug of tea. "Spill it, what happened?" I gave her the short version. Her response was instant. "Take a week off. We'll handle the Carter manuscript without you." "I can't just pause work over family mess," I argued. "Emily," she said gently, "if you'd sprained your ankle, you rest it. Your dad wounded something deep inside you. That needs care too." I grudgingly agreed to 4 days, spent alternating between tearful outbursts and zoning out to mindless TV. Mark worked from home, staying close while giving me space to sort through my feelings. The world outside kept spinning, unaware of the emotional storm shaking me. On Wednesday, the doorbell chimed. I opened it to find Aunt Margaret standing there, clutching a thick envelope, her usual confidence replaced by hesitation. "Can I come in?" she asked. I paused, then stepped aside. She sat stiffly on our sofa, waving off my offer of coffee. "What your father did was indefensible," she said bluntly. "I should have spoken up that night, and I didn't. I've spent years excusing James's behavior, telling myself it was just his nature." She handed me the envelope. Inside were family photos I'd never seen, Mom glowing while pregnant with me, a young me perched on Dad's shoulders, both of us grinning, a beach trip where Dad patiently showed me how to cast a fishing line, his face warm and open. "He wasn't always this way," Aunt Margaret said quietly. "When your mom first got sick, something shifted in James. He became fixated on control, on tangible wins, like he could fend off pain by mastering everything. I studied the pictures, glimpses of a dad I didn't know. That doesn't make what he's done okay." "No," she agreed, "it doesn't. But I thought you should see there was a time he loved you without strings. That part of him is still there, buried under decades of fear and resentment." After she left, I tucked the photos into my desk, too raw to keep looking but not ready to toss them out. The family fallout sent shockwaves through our extended relatives. Cousins I barely knew texted for gossip. Dad's brother's wife called to say she'd always thought James was too harsh on you. The family's unspoken rules were being questioned, old dynamics suddenly up for debate. 6 days after the gala, seeing Dad's name on my phone triggered a panic attack so intense Mark had to guide me through breathing exercises for half an hour. That evening, he looked up therapists specializing in family wounds and emotional neglect. "You need someone trained for this," he said, showing me a curated list. "This is bigger than I can help you carry." I chose Dr. Laura Bennett, whose warm eyes and straightforward bio photo felt oddly comforting. My first session was set for the following Monday. "What if this shatters me completely?" I asked Mark the night before. "What if I'm more broken than I realize?" "You're not broken, Emily," he said, pulling me close. "You're bruised, there's a difference. And sometimes things have to crack open to heal right." 8 days after the retirement party disaster, Dad showed up unannounced at our building. The doorman buzzed, asking if we'd see James Thornton. My hand trembled on the intercom. "Your choice," Mark said. "We can say no." "No," I decided. "Let's finish this." Dad looked diminished as he stepped into our apartment, his usual authority muted outside his normal power zones. His gaze flicked over our cozy but modest home with barely hidden disdain. "I'm here to set things straight," he said, skipping any pleasantries. That stunt at my retirement was outrageous. "You told me to get out in front of everyone," I reminded him, my voice steadier than I felt. "What did you expect to happen? I expected you to honor my wishes. Instead, your husband turned my career celebration into a circus." Mark, who'd promised to let me lead this, stayed quiet beside me, his presence a steady anchor. "Did you come to say sorry?" I asked. Dad looked baffled. "Sorry for what? For being upfront about my disappointment. I've given you every chance to make something of yourself, and you've thrown them all away." In that moment, I saw it clearly, what Mark had been saying for years. Dad could only see the ways I didn't match his mold. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said softly. "I'm not done," he snapped. "I've talked to my lawyer. If you and Mark don't publicly apologize, you're both out of my will. Understand? The old Emily would have caved, desperate to win back his approval. But standing in my own home, with Mark by my side and the life we'd built around us, I found a strength I didn't know I had. We don't need your money, I said. We never did. What we wanted was your love, your acceptance, but I'm done begging for something you should have given freely. Dad's face tightened. You'll regret this. When you're scraping by with your little book venture, you'll wish you'd shown respect. I respect myself now, I said. That's enough. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard it shook the walls. A picture fell, its frame splintering on the floor, a snapshot from our wedding, Mark and I laughing as we smeared cake on each other's faces. I knelt to pick it up, easing out the cracked glass. Kind of fitting, I said softly. What's that? Mark asked. The frame broke, but we're still whole. Mark and I cleared away the broken glass in silence, leaving any talk of Dad behind for the night. Instead, we ordered pizza, cracked open a bottle of red, and debated whether Austin could be the place for a new chapter. The notion of putting physical space between us and the emotional baggage felt more fitting by the minute. As I slipped into sleep that night, it dawned on me that I hadn't uttered a single apology all day. For someone who'd spent decades saying sorry just for being me, that quiet triumph meant the world. What's your dad like? Dr. Laura Bennett asked during our first therapy session. For nearly an hour, I let loose a flood of stories I'd barely shared, even with Mark, my words spilling out raw and unfiltered. Dr. Bennett listened with calm focus, jotting down notes here and there. As we wrapped up, she leaned forward with a steady gaze. Emily, are you familiar with emotional neglect? That question launched a 4-month exploration of family patterns, how trauma shapes us, and the gradual work of piecing my self-esteem back together. Dr. Bennett helped me recognize behaviors I'd long accepted as standard. Dad's love doled out only with conditions, my siblings, parts in our fractured family, and my own survival tactics that once kept me safe but now boxed me in. Healing's messy, she cautioned. You'll hit bumps, days when old doubts feel truer than new strengths. That's just how it goes. She was right on the money. Some mornings, I woke up certain I was broken beyond repair. Certain workdays, a client's feedback sent me reeling into insecurity. Some evenings, I caught myself glancing at my phone, half expecting a message from Dad despite it all. Panic attacks still crept up, sometimes tied to memories of Dad, sometimes striking without a clear spark. After a few rough ones, Dr. Bennett floated the idea of medication. It's not a lifelong deal, she said. Think of it as a bridge while your mind builds new pathways. Within weeks, the low-dose anti-anxiety meds started to shift things. That constant buzz of worry in my chest dialed down. I slept more soundly, laughed more openly with Mark, and tackled work with a steadier hand. Meanwhile, Mark and I dove into researching Austin. Its lively book scene, open-hearted vibe, and miles from Seattle pulled us in. We built spreadsheets breaking down neighborhoods, rent costs, and spots for Beacon Books' next home. Are we just dodging the past? I asked Mark one night as we scrolled through Austin rentals. We're leaning into something new, he said. That's not the same thing. Our choice locked in when Mark got a surprise offer from an Austin tech startup focused on digital publishing tools. The job came with a solid pay hike and 3 remote workdays a week. It's like the world's giving us a nod, he said, waving the email at me. We mapped out a 7-month plan for the move, giving us time to wrap up Seattle projects and shift the business carefully. I was sharing these ideas with Sarah when her eyes flicked past me, widening. Emily Evans. A woman stepped up to my desk, her floral perfume hitting me before her words. I'm Carla Vance. I was your dad's assistant for 18 years. My gut twisted. If Dad sent you, she shook her head quickly. James doesn't know I'm here. I left the bank 6 weeks ago, so he can't touch me for this. She glanced around the office. Can we talk somewhere quiet? Over lattes at a nearby coffee shop, Carla shared stories that echoed my fears and shed light on Dad's wider behavior. His harsh perfectionism and biting comments didn't stop at me. They spilled onto his team, especially women. He'd left young staff in tears, swiped credit for others' work, and nursed grudges over small slights for years. At the gala, 3 colleagues told me privately they always thought James was too cruel to you, Carla said. Your husband's speech, it hit home for anyone who'd felt your dad's sharp edge. Why come forward now? I asked. Carla stirred her latte slowly. For 18 years, I watched you chase approval from a man who keeps raising the bar just as you reach it. I saw you carry the blame for his failure to show care, and I stayed quiet. She reached out, briefly touching my wrist. I'm not keeping quiet anymore. Carla's words were like a lifeline, proof I hadn't made up or overstated Dad's treatment. They steeled my commitment to forge a life free from his control. Over the next few weeks, I reached out to cousins on Mom's side I'd lost touch with after she passed. To my surprise, many were eager to reconnect. Mom's sister Ellen invited Mark and me to her Oregon cabin for a weekend, where she shared family lore and photos I'd never seen. Your mom would be so proud of the woman you've grown into, Ellen said, handing me Mom's old art journals. She was a painter too, you know, before she met your dad and took on his world. Discovering my creative streak came from Mom felt like unlocking a hidden part of myself I'd thought was a quirk in our practical family. 6 months after the gala, I was giving a talk at a small book festival about Beacon Books' mission to champion unheard voices. Partway through, I realized I was speaking with ease, no longer haunted by the self-doubt that used to shadow every public moment. You were incredible, Mark said later as we clinked glasses with authors and publishing pals. I didn't once see Dad's frown in my head, I said, stunned. Even when I mispronounced that writer's name, I said, still surprised. Dr. Bennett noted the milestone in our next session. You're starting to hear your own voice, she said, one that values you, louder than your dad's criticism ever was. Our Austin plans moved forward. A weekend house hunt led us to a cozy bungalow with a remodeled shed perfect for my office space. We put down a deposit, making our new beginning official. Back in Seattle, I grew Beacon Books' mission by launching an imprint for memoirs about family healing and overcoming emotional wounds. The project sparked both professional excitement and personal purpose, turning my hurt into something meaningful. My connection with Ethan kept warming slowly. He called now and then, our talks gradually feeling less forced. In one conversation, he admitted he'd started seeing a therapist. That night at Dad's gala made me face some hard truths, he said. Like how I've spent my whole life chasing Dad's approval. It's exhausting. Sophia stayed loyal to Dad, sending a stiff wedding invite addressed only to Mark with a note stuck on. No disruptions, please. We sent a polite decline and a lavish gift from their registry. 7 months after the gala, Mark and I started talking about kids, a topic I'd dodged, terrified I'd carry Dad's coldness. What if I turn out like him? I murmured, voicing my biggest fear. What if I can't love a child without strings? You're asking that question, Mark said, which shows you won't be like him. You're aware of the patterns and working to change them. That night's therapy session was a turning point. I let out my anger at Dad, raw and unapologetic, without softening it. Dr. Bennett had me write a letter I'd never send, spilling decades of pain and rage. I hate how you broke me, I scrawled, my pen nearly tearing the page. I hate that you made me think I was defective. I hate that part of me still wants your approval. The release felt like a weight lifting. Afterward, I realized weeks had passed since I'd thought of Dad daily. His hold on my emotions was fading, his absence less a gaping wound and more a simple reality. In our final week in Seattle, I got a surprise email from Dad's former colleague, the older man who nodded to me as we left the gala. I'm retiring to Austin next month, he wrote. James and I had a falling out over his treatment of a young staffer, which echoed how he treated you. If you and Mark are settled, maybe we could grab coffee. Chosen family often outshines blood ties. As we loaded our lives into a moving truck, I found the envelope of photos Aunt Margaret had given me. They stung less now, like they belonged to a story, not my family. I packed them with newer snapshots, Mark and me trekking in the Cascades, our book festival booth buzzing with readers, a cozy dinner with friends who loved us for us. On our last night in the empty Seattle apartment, Mark found me staring out at the city's glowing skyline. Rethinking things? He asked, his arms wrapping around me. No, I said honestly. I'm just saying goodbye to the old me, the one who never felt enough. You were always enough, Mark said. You just couldn't see it yet. As we drove south the next morning, I realized I hadn't checked my phone for Dad's messages in nearly 2 weeks. It wasn't a deliberate choice, just the quiet fading of a habit that no longer fit. The sharp sting of his rejection had shifted, not gone, but replaced by a growing sense of self-worth. Austin greeted us with a week of bright spring sun, like it was cheering our choice. While unpacking in our new home, I found the cracked wedding photo frame from Dad's last visit. I'd kept the frame but replaced the glass. This belongs here, I said, setting it on our living room mantel, a reminder of what we carried forward and what we left behind. Mark grinned, getting it completely. The past shaped us, he said, but it doesn't get to dictate our future. A year after Dad's gala, I stood in our Austin kitchen, sipping sparkling juice. Through the window, I saw Mark grilling on our patio, surrounded by new friends and chosen family. Spring light danced through blooming redbuds, scattering soft shadows across our yard. The past year had brought changes. I couldn't have dreamed of that awful night in Seattle. Beacon Books thrived in Austin's vibrant literary scene, earning a local Business Impact Award for our community programs. My therapy with Dr. Bennett had shifted from weekly sessions to monthly check-ins. Most incredibly, I was 5 months pregnant with our first child. Need a hand? Asked Aunt Margaret, who'd flown in for our housewarming. Her bond with Dad had frayed since she kept in touch with me, but at 70, she'd chosen her own values over family peace. I'm good, I said, smiling as I handed her a tray of snacks to take outside. The doorbell rang as I arranged a charcuterie board. I opened it to find Ethan, looking road-weary but offering a shy grin. Sorry I'm late, he said. Flight from Chicago got delayed. I pulled him into a hug, still adjusting to this warmer connection we were building. Over the year, our stiff phone calls had grown into real conversations. He'd visited Austin twice, each time sharing more about his own battles with Dad's expectations. "Come on in," I said. "Everyone's out back. How's Lily?" Ethan had recently started seeing a librarian who brought out his softer side. "She's great," he said. "Wanted to come, but she couldn't get away from work." He paused, then handed me an envelope. "I wasn't sure about showing you this, but you should see it." Inside was a brief article from a Seattle finance journal with a small photo of Dad. The headline read, "Former Pacific Trust VP James Thornton hospitalized after minor heart event." "He's okay physically," Ethan said quickly, catching my look. "But it's shaken him. He's alone a lot now. Sophia stops by when her surgical residency allows, but she's swamped." He refused help at first, but after he scorched a meal and set off the smoke alarms, neighbors called me. I studied Dad's photo. He looked older, smaller somehow. "I'm sorry he's not well," I said sincerely, "but I'm not sure what you want me to do with this." Ethan shrugged. "Nothing really, just thought you deserved to know." I set the article aside, vowing to deal with it later. Today was for celebrating, not digging up old hurts. The party hummed around me, filled with people who lifted us up. My Beacon Books team mingled with Mark's tech colleagues. Aunt Margaret swapped gardening tips with our neighbor. Ethan eased into the crowd, showing real curiosity in a writer's talk about storytelling as therapy. As dusk settled, Mark called for a toast, raising his glass. "A year ago, Emily and I made the best choice of our lives moving to Austin, but it started before that, with a moment of truth at a certain retirement party." Knowing looks passed among those who knew the story. "That night could have crushed us, but it set us free." He turned to me, his gaze warm. "To Emily, who showed me that true strength isn't never falling, it's getting back up every time life pushes you down. To all of you who have become our Austin family, thank you for embracing us just as we are," I said, raising my glass. Cheers rang out as everyone toasted, and standing there, wrapped in real warmth, I felt a wholeness I'd chased for years. The approval I'd craved from Dad was like chasing a shadow, always slipping away as I got close. True acceptance, I'd learned, didn't mean twisting myself to fit someone else's mold. After our guests left, Ethan pitched in with cleanup, surprisingly at ease as he stacked plates in the dishwasher. "I've got something to admit," he said, neatly folding a kitchen towel. "I've been in therapy for 9 months now." "That's amazing, Ethan," I said, truly glad for him. "It's flipping how I see things, Dad, me, even you," he said, propping against the counter. "Did you know I envied you as a kid?" I nearly fumbled the bowl I was washing. "Me, you were the star. I was the one who followed orders," he said. "I got Dad's nods, sure, but you always knew who you were. Even when it cost you, you stayed real. I never had that guts." We talked deep into the night after Mark turned in, swapping views on childhood moments that reshaped how I saw old memories. When Ethan headed to his hotel, he pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm sorry I wasn't a better brother," he whispered. "We're crafting a new chapter now," I said. "That's what counts." A few days later, while wandering through Austin's iconic bookstore, I got a text from Sophia, the first direct contact in ages. "Dad, been asking about you. Probably no big deal. Just FYI." I stood still among the shelves, my hand resting on my gently rounded belly. The old Emily would have dropped everything, raced back to Seattle, grasping at any chance for a connection. But the new me saw the text for what it was, Sophia passing the buck, framing any ongoing distance as my call, not Dad. After a long talk with Mark, I sent a measured reply. "Thanks for the heads up. wishing him a speedy recovery. Not a door locked tight, but not a frantic dash to fling it open either, just a nod to shared humanity despite our fractured bond. 2 weeks later, a random moment showed me how far I'd come. While visiting a colleague in the hospital after a routine procedure, I turned a corner and nearly bumped into Dad. He looked startled, then guarded. He'd thinned out with a slight sag on one side of his face, a trace of the heart event Ethan mentioned. "Emily," he said, his voice gruffer than I recalled. "Dad," I replied, calm and steady, surprising myself. "Ethan said you've had some health troubles. Hope you're on the mend." He gave a curt nod. "Just a follow-up, nothing major." We stood in the hospital hallway, staff weaving past us like water around stones. "You seem different," he said after a pause. I offered a small smile. "I'm expecting, due in October." A flicker crossed his face, shock, maybe a trace of something deeper, quickly buried. "I see. Congratulations." "Thanks." Silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken words. I realized I was waiting for something, an apology, maybe, or some recognition of the hurt he'd caused. But his face stayed blank, his stance stiff. "I should get going," I said at last. "My colleague expecting me." He nodded. "Say hi to Mark for me." The polite, empty phrase, so unlike our last clash, almost made me chuckle. Instead, I nodded and walked on, heading down the hall. What hit me later was what happened, but what didn't. No racing pulse. No narrowing vision. No aching need to win his love. I'd faced Dad as an equal, unshackled from the wounds of my childhood. The moment left me thoughtful but not wrecked. "He'll never change," I told Mark that night. "Not at his core." "Probably not," Mark agreed. "You okay with that?" I thought it over carefully. "Think so. For the first time, I get that his flaws aren't my fault." That fall, as Austin's trees blazed with shades of amber and crimson, we readied our home for the baby. Ethan stopped by twice, hauling over-the-top gifts for his soon-to-be niece or nephew that were as sweet as they were impractical. Aunt Margaret mailed hand-stitched blankets and kept me posted on family chatter, including the tidbit that Dad had started dadding a widow from his community center who seemed to handle his prickly nature. "Good for him," I said when I heard, and I meant it. His joy or misery no longer shaped mine. In early October 2024, our daughter, Nora Claire Evans, arrived after 18 grueling hours of labor. Cradling her for the first time, I was swept by a love so deep and pure it brought tears to my eyes. "She's flawless," Mark murmured, brushing her tiny hand. Gazing at Nora's serene face, I made a quiet vow. She'd grow up knowing she was enough, just as she was. Her value would never hinge on trophies or fitting someone else's mold. She'd be cherished for her true self, whatever form that took. Ethan flew in the next week to meet his niece, holding her with a mix of awe and nerves. "She's got Mom's eyes," he said, gently touching her cheek. "I thought so too," I replied, warmed that he saw the link to our mother. He paused, then added, "I told Dad about her. He didn't say much, just asked for a photo." I nodded, neither stirred nor upset by the news. Dad was now a distant figure in my life, no longer its central force. As the holidays neared, we hosted a cozy dinner for our chosen family, friends who'd become vital to our Austin life, Ethan with his now steady girlfriend, Lily, and Aunt Margaret. Our home buzzed with light and laughter. Nora was passed from one loving embrace to another as we swapped stories and savored the meal. After dinner, as we settled in the living room with pie, Mark raised a toast. "To family," he said simply. Not just the one we're born into, but the one we build with love and choice. To family, everyone echoed, glasses clinking. Surrounded by people who embraced all of me, my strengths, my flaws, my quirks, I finally grasped the lesson from that wrenching gala 2 years ago. What felt like the end, Dad's final rejection, was really the start. By standing up and walking out with Mark that night, I'd taken the first step toward my true home. Nora fussed, and I slipped away to feed her in the calm of her nursery. Swaying in the rocker Mark had refinished, I studied her perfect face and felt a peace I'd never known. "You'll never have to earn my love," I whispered. "It's yours, fully and always." In that moment, I realized I'd given myself the same gift, accepting myself without needing to prove my worth. The path hadn't been smooth, and tough days still came, but at 35, I'd found a truth that had dodged me for years. I was enough. I'd always been enough. Laughter floated in from the living room, and Nora's tiny fingers curled tight around mine. This was my legacy now, not Dad's disapproval, but my daughter's future. Not a life shaped by someone else's rules, but one I was crafting with every honest choice. What's your story of breaking free from toxic family pressures? Has someone ever stood up for you when you couldn't stand for yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story hit home, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to know they're enough, just as they are. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Sometimes, the boldest move is walking away from what breaks us toward what helps us heal.